They smiled in photographs, wore polished boots, and carried whips with pride. They were part of the machine. Women who didn't just follow orders, but chose brutality. Inside Auschwitz, Bergen-Belsen, and Ravensbrück, they screamed commands, beat the weak, and sent families to die. And when the war ended, the world turned to them, not with mercy. Their trials were swift, their deaths public, because what they did couldn't be buried with the war. It all goes back to the early 1940s, when Nazi Germany expanded its network of concentration camps. There was a growing need for personnel to guard, control, and manage tens of thousands of prisoners. Men were being sent to the front lines, so the SS began recruiting women. By 1942, female guards, known as Aufseherinnen, became a regular part of the concentration camp system. Most of these women came from working-class backgrounds. They weren't highly educated or politically powerful. Some had worked as clerks or nurses, while others had been maids, seamstresses, or shop workers. They were trained at camps like Ravensbrück before being transferred to places like Auschwitz, Majdanek, or Bergen-Belsen. At Auschwitz alone, it's estimated that over 200 female guards served between 1942 and 1945. They were responsible for maintaining discipline among prisoners, overseeing roll calls, escorting inmates to forced labor, and in many cases, selecting women and children for gas chambers. They received military-style training and wore SS uniforms, sometimes even carrying pistols or wooden clubs. Irma Greza was among the youngest and most infamous. She began her training at Ravensbrück and arrived at Auschwitz in 1943. Despite her age, just 19 years old, she quickly gained a reputation for sadism. Survivors testified that she often beat women for no reason, used her leather whip to injure inmates, and unleashed dogs on them. She also took part in selections for the gas chambers, standing alongside SS doctors like Josef Mengele. Maria Mandl, originally from Austria, had a much higher rank. As the Lagerführerin, or female camp leader, she oversaw all female guards at Auschwitz-Birkenau. She signed off on selections for extermination and was known for creating the Women's Orchestra of Auschwitz, which played music as prisoners marched to work or to their deaths. Under her command, over 500,000 women and children passed through the camp. Most didn't leave alive. Other guards included Elisabeth Volkenrath, who was promoted to Oberaufseherin and was known for organizing punishments and participating in selections, and Theresa Brandl, who served directly under Mandl and took part in daily routines that often led women straight to the gas chambers. These women didn't just follow orders. Many participated actively. Some even enjoyed the power they held over life and death. And as the war began to turn against Germany, the consequences of their actions would soon follow. In January 1945, as the Soviet army pushed deeper into Poland, the Nazi leadership realized Auschwitz was about to be overrun. In a rush to erase evidence, SS officers destroyed gas chambers with explosives, dismantled crematoria, and set fire to warehouses filled with documents. Barracks were emptied, camp offices were cleared out, but the scale of the operation was too large to hide everything. On January 17th, the Nazis began evacuating the camp. About 56,000 prisoners, many barely able to walk, were forced to march west in sub-zero temperatures. These became known as the Death Marches. Along the snowy roads, thousands collapsed from exhaustion, cold, or hunger. SS guards shot anyone who slowed down. By the time the survivors reached camps like Mauthausen or Buchenwald, over 15,000 had died. Those who remained behind, too weak or sick to move, were left to die. Some were hidden in filthy hospital barracks. Others lay unconscious on wooden bunks or the cold floor, surrounded by piles of bodies. Guards abandoned their posts and fled in the days before the Soviet arrival, leaving the camp eerily silent. On January 27, 1945, the Red Army entered Auschwitz. soldiers found over 7,000 prisoners, most in critical condition. Many were children, some orphaned, some used in medical experiments. Soviet medics worked quickly to save those they could, but hundreds more died in the following days, too far gone to recover. The soldiers discovered over 800,000 pieces of women's clothing, 44,000 pairs of shoes, and over 7 tons of human hair, stored in warehouses, ready to be shipped to Germany. They also found gas chambers, still stained with Zyklon B residue, and crematoria, filled with human ashes. Photographers and journalists captured every detail. The images spread quickly. For the first time, the world saw what had happened inside Auschwitz. Not rumors, not speculation. Hard proof. Visual evidence of industrial-scale murder. And as this truth reached the outside world, the hunt began for the people who made it all happen. After Auschwitz's liberation, chaos spread across what was left of the Third Reich. Millions of people, soldiers, civilians, and Nazi officials were fleeing west, trying to escape the advancing Soviet army. Among them were former SS personnel, including the female Guards of Auschwitz. Many changed out of their uniforms and tried to disappear into the crowds of refugees. Some used false names. Others claimed to be civilians. But their pasts weren't so easy to erase. Survivors who had made it through the camps could still recognize them. Despite malnutrition and trauma, many remembered exact details, how a guard walked, how she shouted, the expressions on her face. These testimonies led Allied investigators straight to the women who thought they had escaped justice. Irma Greza was arrested by British forces at the Bergen-Belsen camp, where she had been transferred before the end of the war. She was still in uniform. Witnesses immediately identified her as the guard from Auschwitz, known for beatings and selections. Maria Mandel, who had flown south into Bavaria, was caught by American troops. She tried to hide her identity, but her name was already on wanted lists. She was soon handed over to the Polish authorities due to her crimes at Auschwitz-Birkenau. Elisabeth Volkenrath, who had been promoted to head overseer, was also found at Bergen-Belsen. Like Greza, she was recognized by multiple prisoners. Johanna Bormann was captured in the same sweep. Survivors accused her of unleashing her trained dog on women and children at Birkenau. Hildegard Leichert, known for her time at Majdanek and Auschwitz, was identified later and arrested separately. Her violent reputation had followed her across more than one concentration camp. Some of the women tried to deny everything. Others said they had no choice, that they were simply carrying out commands from male officers. But their actions weren't forgotten. Testimonies came from all directions. Jews, Poles, Roma, even former political prisoners, each one recalling brutal treatment, starvation, punishments, and selections for the gas chambers. These were not isolated cases. Their crimes were consistent and repeated. For the Allies, these arrests were just the beginning. They didn't want confessions. They wanted trials. They wanted the world to see what these women had done and hold them accountable in front of everyone. That's when the British military set up a war crimes tribunal in Lüneburg, a town in northern Germany, in September 1945. The trial focused primarily on atrocities committed at the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp, but many of those on trial had also served at Auschwitz, where the crimes had first begun. It quickly became one of the most publicized trials of Nazi war criminals outside the Nuremberg proceedings. A total of 45 individuals were charged, including 16 women, making it one of the largest trials involving female war criminals. Among them were former SS guards, camp functionaries, and even former prisoners who had collaborated with the Nazis. All were accused of war crimes, crimes against humanity, and mistreatment of prisoners. The trial opened in a British military courtroom with tight security. The room was crowded every day. International journalists filled the benches. Survivors testified in multiple languages. Military prosecutors presented dozens of photographs taken after liberation. Images of naked corpses stacked like firewood, mass graves, and starved men and women barely clinging to life. The defendants sat in rows behind a wooden railing, dressed in simple prison clothing. Some looked pale. Others stared blankly ahead. But as the testimony began, attention quickly turned to a few names. Irma Greza, just 22 years old, became the face of the trial. Her youth and calm demeanor shocked many. She was accused of participating in the deaths of thousands. Johanna Bormann admitted that she trained her dog to attack prisoners on command. One witness recalled her laughing while women were beaten. Elisabeth Volkenrath was accused of organizing roll calls that lasted for hours in the cold. Other women like Ilse Lotta and Gerda Ellert also faced charges, though their roles were seen as less prominent. Still, the testimonies revealed patterns of violence, humiliation, and systematic abuse. Each survivor who took the stand added new details. One woman described how she lost her entire family in a single day. Another showed scars from beatings. Their stories painted a clear picture of daily life inside the camps, where guards had absolute power and cruelty became routine. The evidence piled up. The testimonies lined up. And each passing day made it harder for the defendants to hide behind the defense of just following orders. The courtroom wasn't just a place for justice. It became a place for truth. And soon, that truth would lead to the final judgment. On November 17, 1945, after nearly 2 months of testimony, witness accounts and cross-examinations, the British military court in Lüneburg delivered its final verdicts. The room fell silent as each name was read aloud with their sentence. Irma Greza, Johanna Bormann, and Elisabeth Volkenrath were sentenced to death by hanging. All three had been found guilty of active participation in the torture, abuse, and murder of concentration camp prisoners. Their involvement at both Auschwitz and Bergen-Belsen had been proven beyond doubt through survivor testimonies, documentation, and photographic evidence. Greza, often called the hyena of Auschwitz, had shown no remorse throughout the trial. Her composed demeanor, even during sentencing, disturbed many observers. Bormann stared ahead without speaking. Volkenrath remained emotionless, as if already resigned to her fate. Other defendants, including Gerda Ellert and Ilse Lotta, received prison sentences ranging from 10 years to life. Several male guards and camp functionaries were also convicted and sentenced accordingly. 11 people in total were sentenced to death, including both men and women. 19 were imprisoned, while 14 were acquitted, largely due to insufficient evidence or uncertainty about their roles. The public response was immediate and passionate. British, American, and European newspapers ran front-page stories with photos of the condemned, especially Irma Greza, whose age and appearance sparked both shock and fascination. Editorials debated whether justice had been fully served, or if more executions were needed. Many couldn't accept that women, especially so young, had played such horrific roles in genocide. But the testimonies had made one thing clear, that their gender did not lessen their guilt. The British authorities stood firm. There would be no delay, no appeal, no pardon. December 13, 1945 was set as the execution date. The location? Hamelin Prison, northwest of Hanover. The man chosen to carry out the hangings was Albert Pierrepoint, Britain's most experienced executioner. The world had witnessed their crimes in court. Now it would witness their end. At Hamelin Prison, a former Wehrmacht facility now under British control, preparations began quietly but precisely. The gallows were constructed inside a converted storage building, designed to carry out multiple executions swiftly and efficiently. This was no ordinary task. The British authorities wanted everything done by the book. No spectacle, no delay. Albert Pierrepoint was brought in. By this time, he had already hanged several high-ranking Nazis following the Nuremberg and Belsen trials. But these hangings stood out, not because of who the condemned were, but because 3 of them were women. Female executions were rare in British history, and almost unheard of in the 20th century. Pierrepoint didn't hesitate. He treated them like any other prisoner. He reviewed their files, took note of their heights and weights to calculate the correct drop, and inspected the gallows to ensure nothing could go wrong. The condemned were held in individual cells, heavily guarded. Irma Greze reportedly kept to herself, sometimes staring at the wall for hours. Johanna Bormann, age 52, was quieter still. Elisabeth Volkenrath, 26, avoided conversation. Guards said none of them cried, begged, or asked for mercy. A few whispered prayers. Others simply waited. At 9:34 a.m., December 13, 1945, the first cell door opened. Irma Greze was let out. She walked calmly with no struggle. Pierre Point later noted how composed she seemed, even as the noose was placed around her neck. Just 6 minutes later, Johanna Bormann followed. Then another 6 minutes after that, Elisabeth Volkenrath stepped onto the platform. Each execution was methodical, no final statements recorded. The only witnesses were British officers, prison staff, and the execution team. Once dead, their bodies were taken down immediately. They were buried in unmarked graves, along with other executed war criminals, in a quiet section of the prison yard. The hangings made headlines worldwide, not because of sympathy, but because of the cold finality of it all. Even young women, the world now understood, could be responsible for unspeakable evil. And the gallows would not be taken down. There were still more executions to come. After the Belsen trials, attention turned to Poland, where many of the worst atrocities had occurred. The Polish government, devastated by years of Nazi occupation, insisted on holding its own war crimes trials. These proceedings, later known as the Auschwitz trials, began in November 1947 in Krakow. A total of 40 former Auschwitz personnel were put on trial, including 25 men and 15 women. Most had worked in the camp during its deadliest years, between 1942 and 1944. They included SS officers, medical staff, and female guards accused of directly participating in mass murder. Among the most infamous was Maria Mandel. Her reputation had already reached horrifying levels. Survivors called her the Beast, not for what she ordered others to do, but for what she did herself. During her trial, eyewitnesses described how Mandel personally selected women and children for the gas chambers, sometimes pointing with her hand or simply nodding. She was known to smile during roll calls that dragged on for hours, watching prisoners collapse in snow, mud, or rain. One survivor testified that Mandel kept a dog trained to attack female inmates on command. The courtroom was packed during her hearings. Polish prosecutors presented not just testimonies, but documents, camp records, and photographs of victims. There was no doubt about her guilt. She showed little emotion throughout the trial. On December 22, 1947, the court sentenced her to death by hanging. Her execution was carried out on January 24, 1948, in Krakow's Montelupik prison, a site once used by the Gestapo for torture. She was hanged alongside several other former Auschwitz staff. For Poland, the trials were more than justice. The country that had suffered so much would not let the world forget what had happened on its soil. But even these trials didn't close the book. There were still more names to uncover. There were names that faded into the background, but their crimes were no less severe. After the war, Poland continued to bring former Nazi camp staff to justice, especially those involved in Auschwitz and other extermination camps. Teresa Brandl, a guard at Auschwitz, stood trial alongside Maria Mandel. Witnesses described how she took part in selections for the gas chambers and was known for physically assaulting female prisoners. She showed no remorse during the trial. On January 24, 1948, she was hanged in Krakow, the same day and place as Mandel. Luisa Dans, who served at several camps, including Ravensbrück and Majdanek, was tried by a Polish court and sentenced to life in prison. Her crimes included beating and mistreating prisoners, some of whom died from their injuries. But her life sentence didn't last. In the 1950s, she was released early due to health claims and political shifts in post-war Europe. Another name resurfaced decades later, Hildegard Leichhardt, often called Bloody Bridget by survivors, had worked at Majdanek, Auschwitz, and Ravensbrück. She was first tried in Poland and sentenced to 15 years, but released early. Years later, she was arrested again in West Germany and put on trial during the 1970s Frankfurt Auschwitz proceedings. There, new evidence and testimonies led to another conviction. This time, she was sentenced to 12 years in prison. These were just a few of the women who participated in the Nazi camp system. Some were executed, others imprisoned, and a few managed to disappear into ordinary life. But even when the punishment was light, the historical record remained. Their names, once anonymous, became permanently linked to a system built on death, cruelty, and fear. What made some of these executions even more shocking was how public they were. Photos of the gallows were published in newspapers. People around the world saw young women being hanged for war crimes. In some places, crowds gathered near prisons, waiting for news. It wasn't just about justice. It was about closure. Survivors who had lost everything needed to see the people responsible punished. Some critics later said the public nature of the hangings was too harsh. Others believed it was necessary, because what these women did was not just illegal, it was inhuman. And that's exactly why their faces were plastered in newspapers, because the world wanted to make sure we'd never forget.